Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick. The Heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsom with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. Heels can get a first down at the 3. Howe, pump fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Howe at the 5. Takes the shot. Pinballing off the chains for the touchdown. Sam Howe showing the toughness for 6.
Cardinals down 4, 35-31. Maye has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right.
Throws to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag.
Snapping it off the 8-yard line. Maye pulls it, tries to roll it apart.
Oh, now he's going to throw it and score! Throws it to Paytor in the end zone for the touchdown! Maye throws this one through the left hand. Was walking out on the run and threw it left-handed. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotti, here with you guys, as always, on a Friday night here in frigid North Carolina, coming at you from the Charlotte area. Hopefully everybody is being safe tonight, and of course things are going to get worse here over the next couple of days in the state, so want to make sure that you guys are being safe here during this stretch of time. We care about you out there. I know, we have a weird way of showing it by doing a podcast, but we do care about all of our listeners. We hope you guys are safe during this winter storm that'll be going on. We'll probably be with you at some point during the winter storm on Monday. I know by that time, hopefully the storm has moved out, but could still be some remnants that are around during that time. We will be doing the preview of the schedule for the 2026 season. That is going to drop on Monday. They said that earlier today on ACC Network. They're going to have a whole show that they're going to be doing. So as long as they don't lose power, I think we're going to be good here on our end, hopefully, to be able to do something for you guys as well with the Tar Heels schedule for this upcoming season. So make sure that you guys are sticking around with us through all of that. But tonight's edition of the podcast, just trying to catch you up before we have that edition of the podcast on everything that's been going on around Tar Heel football here recently. So we're going to get to the 2 commitments that Carolina's landed since the last time that we were on here talking to you guys in the transfer portal. Then we're going to get to Greg Smith re-signing. There was that saga that happened late last week, and so we'll get to that. And then got to talk about Drake Maye, man, having a chance to go to Super Bowl 60. That's going to be an exciting opportunity for him. And so we're going to talk you through all of that stuff here on this edition of the podcast. Not going to be too long here, so lock in here for about the next 30 minutes, guys, and we'll be taking you through your Friday evening. So as I mentioned, 2 commitments for the Tar Heels in the portal. It goes with Caleb Jackson and Brandon Homadi. Caleb Jackson, a running back, Hamadi, an offensive lineman for Carolina, and one that was crucial that they had to add because of the loss of another guy that the Tar Heels had committed in Sean Tompkins to their class. Unfortunately, he drops off, goes to LSU, and so Carolina lost the commitment there. They end up picking up another one in Homadi, who not nearly the player that Sean Tompkins is. You look at him, he measures in at 6'3", 298 pounds. Transfers to Carolina after just one season at West Virginia. In his lone season, he was active for 11 games with the majority of his 52 snaps coming on special teams. Played 8 snaps on the offensive side of the ball, posting 6 snaps in the game against Robert Morris and 2 in the game against Utah. The 6 snaps in the game against Robert Morris came at left tackle. Meanwhile, in the game against Utah, he was just an extra blocker out there for 2 snaps. So that is certainly not the most experience that you'd be liking along that offensive line. We'll talk more about that here in a second. Caleb Jackson, in the meantime, is a running back, transfers in from LSU. So, this one, really what I compared it to is this is Benjamin Hall from last year coming in from Michigan. I know that he's a guy that people want to be excited about off of the highlight of him running through a guy in a game against Mississippi State. I think it was from last year, not this previous season that just concluded the other night down there in Miami. But I think it was the last season that he played in 2024. This is a guy who I think has some potential. There's no doubt about that. But do I think that he's going to be an absolute monster for Carolina? Probably not. A guy who measures in at 6 foot, 234 pounds, former 4-star prospect coming out of high school that played in 30 games in his career with the Tigers. So far in his career, he's carried the ball 82 times for 331 yards and 4 touchdowns. Caught 17 passes for 172 yards as well. After 2 seasons of solid production, in 23 and 24, Jackson saw limited action this past season, playing in just 4 games before he set out the remainder of the season to preserve his redshirt. Most successful season came as a true freshman back in 2023, where he carried the ball 31 times for 165 yards and 4 touchdowns. He will have 2 years of eligibility remaining. Homadi along the offensive line will have 3 years of eligibility remaining at this level. And so, look, these pickups are not ones that I think we thought we were going to be talking about when Carolina hit the transfer portal. Initially Carolina jumped on a couple of guys. There was one in particular, his name is slipping my mind now for some reason, but the running back out of Liberty that Carolina was looking to bring in, that was a guy that was a 1,000-yard rusher at Liberty, over 1,000 yards this season. And so you thought, okay, Carolina is going to go big game hunting with some of these guys that they're going to potentially be getting out of the transfer portal, or at least, semi big game hunting. It really doesn't feel like Carolina's done that. Some of the guys that they've gotten in this class, again, it's a solid transfer class. I don't think it's anything special. There's some guys that I really like in this transfer class. There's no doubt about that. I've talked about some of it. I talked about it a little bit the other night. If you guys listen to Keenan Corner, which is a show that is hosted through Twitter Spaces by my guy Steve, it's Coach Steve on Twitter. If you guys don't follow him, go give him a follow. That would be huge, for him. And he'll be going live again. I think it's every Tuesday night. He's going to try to be doing a live show going forward here after he took a little bit of a hiatus there. But when I was talking through this group, there are guys that I like in this class that Carolina brings in out of the transfer portal. I think there's some potential with guys like Donovan Hoylett. I think there's, a guy in Peyton Seelman that I really like as well, a linebacker. I think he's certainly a guy who, his tackle numbers are going to transition over from the FCS level. I think that certainly can happen. Mason Humphrey, a guy who caught 35 passes for 650 yards this past season as a junior, big play type of wide receiver. Think there's some potential there. Derek McDonald, very solid out of Syracuse, probably not going to blow you away, but is certainly solid enough. I think those pickups, those are ones that you really like for Carolina. Those are ones that make a lot of sense. There's enough of a track record there where it feels like it's going to make a difference. I think, there are a couple of positions that I think were key for Carolina to be able to get guys. Edge rusher was definitely one of them, especially after the loss of Tyler Thompson. Hoylett, was a big pickup, I think, in that area. Really helps Carolina there. Also, really like Jalen Harvey. I think that's an area where Carolina did pretty well. Linebacker was important for Carolina to get Sealman, to get Derek McDonald. I thought that was something that you really needed to see. Tight end, just the sheer numbers wise, in terms of the depth, you needed to get some guys in there. Jelani Thurman comes over from Ohio State, a guy who I really like, has some good potential, especially as a blocker. And then Jordan Washington, the tight end out of Texas, also comes over. But the guy that I like the most, probably Jackson Warren, the 6'8" target who had 7 catches in just 2 games before a season-ending injury this past season. Certainly a guy that I think showed out in that game against Washington. If you go back, look up the highlights of Colorado State's game against the Washington Huskies, you'll see some of the damage that he was able to do against them as a big framed tight end, a guy that's pretty athletic as well. Those are the areas that I really liked. Then there are some other areas where I didn't necessarily love what Carolina has done so far. There is still potential that Carolina can add. I think the number is 2 guys that they can still add. It might only be 1, but we'll have to see those specific numbers. I'll have to do a little bit more research to confirm what exactly the number is. But quarterback seems pretty sturdy at this point. They're going with the group that they're going to have, which is going to be Billy Edwards Jr., Miles O'Neill, as well as Travis Burgess, who's coming in from the high school ranks, and then Arturi Newkirk is going to be the guy that's going to run it back from this past year's roster. And, look, I think Billy Edwards gives you some potential. I think that Miles O'Neill is a guy that has a lot of upside. I think Travis Burgess is someone that you think the sky is the limit for if he can get back from the injury that he suffered in his senior year where he tore his ACL. But I really do think this is one of those areas where you felt like maybe Carolina could go big game hunting. Maybe they were going to go out and get one of these big time names. Felt like there were a lot of them out there. And so Billy Edwards, a little bit of a letdown, in terms of the caliber of guy that they could have gotten. Now, do I think that means Billy Edwards can't be successful? Of course not. I think there is a chance that Billy Edwards, especially with Bobby Petrino as his offensive coordinator, has a chance to succeed. But I would have liked to see Carolina go with a little bit of a bigger name, if I'm being honest. I do think that's something that Carolina could have done, and they just did not go out and do. That area, I think they could have gone after a bigger name. But that one I can understand, wanting to save a little bit of money if you're putting it towards some other spots. And one of the other spots that we heard, this was a report at one time from Tar Heel 24/7, was that Carolina was looking to put more of that money towards the offensive line. That was the reason that they were not going with a big name quarterback, and they were going to stick with a Billy Edwards Jr., sort of a mid-level quarterback, add a guy like Miles O'Neill, who is familiar with Bobby Petrino, was recruited by Bobby Petrino at Texas A&M. And I bought into that, but they didn't do what they needed to do along the offensive line. You got one guy that I think you can guarantee is going to be a starter, and that is Andrew Threet, the transfer from Charleston Southern. Versatile offensive lineman who made 23 consecutive starts at the FCS level. Certainly a guy that can move around a little bit for Carolina, can play right tackle, can play left guard. So there's a couple of different areas that you can use him. I really like what he brings to the table with some of the sack numbers this past year, 6 sacks allowed, 17 quarterback pressures. You'd like to see those numbers, come down a little bit, or you'd like to see him be a little bit better when you're bringing him in from the FCS ranks, but still serviceable enough. I think he's going to be a guy that can translate to this level and at least be solid. Maybe not great, but it can at least be solid for Carolina. Outside of him, you're banking a lot on guys that really just haven't done it throughout their career. Shaq McRoy, a guy who played in 6 games, including 1 start at Arkansas, And it's a guy that's got familiarity with Petrino, a guy that came out of high school as a pretty highly ranked guy, but the snaps just aren't there for him. I mean, he had 58 total offensive snaps, and all those came at right tackle. So that's a guy that's a little inexperienced. Rowan Byrne, the transfer from Clemson, another guy that has some really good potential, 4-year guy in terms of the eligibility remaining, but he only played in one game in 2025. So you're banking on him to come in and be a guy that really takes over a big spot. I don't know about that. And then it's the same thing with Hamadi. I think that's very similar to in that sense with him. I think he's a guy that you're thinking can come in and maybe battle for one of those spots. But in an ideal world, Brandon Hamadi, Rowan Byrne, these are guys that are coming in and are battling for, spots in the rotation, not necessarily to be starters. Now, Carolina's got some other guys that are on the roster. They do have some holdovers that are still going to be there. But, I mean, you're probably going back to Aiden Banfield, a guy that you pretty much completely took out of the lineup. And part of it was that he did have an injury that had him on the availability reports towards the end of the season. But that also might have just been, I mean, with the availability reports, they don't specify what the injuries are. Could have just been that they were not making him active for games. And now you're going to have to look to him as maybe a guy that has to start games for you again this year. Jordan Hall along the offensive line. We saw him towards the end of last season. Didn't look great towards the end of this year. Hopefully that's, something that he gets ironed out. Aiden Buchanan, a guy who started the first game of the season for Carolina at left tackle, never really saw him after that. That's another guy that's now going to be brought into the fold. And then there's some other guys, that we haven't even really mentioned that were on the roster this year, and Trey Blue and Byron Nelson. Those are guys that were holdovers from Mac Brown's recruiting class that will be looking to make an impact on the interior of the offensive line. So, I mean, look, those are guys that, you think there might be some potential there, but ideally you would have gone out and gotten some bigger names. You would have gotten some names that really you can bank on, are going to be able to help you for sure this season. And I just don't really think that they went out and got enough along that offensive line. So I do think that that's something that, you're hopeful that Carolina can just stumble into something there, but that's not where we wanted to be with the offensive line. We thought if you were saving money on the quarterback position, then that was going to be a spot where you were really going to spend and bring in some guys. And then one other area that I really wanted to point to, at least to this point, that I'm a little bit concerned about the approach that Carolina has taken is the cornerback position opposite of Jaden Patterson. They bring in a D. Willie, a guy that I guess, might be able to eventually start at that position. Was a guy that redshirted this year, but he played safety at Michigan State at the during the 4 games that he played here this season during 2025. And I don't know if he's a guy that really tracks well to move back out to corner. The numbers would tell you that he's not a guy that really thrives in coverage in that like that. That's certainly not a guy that's going to be able to lock guys down on the outside. His numbers would probably be very similar to what we saw from Marcus Allen, if not even a little bit worse. And so now Carolina's got to figure out what they're going to do at that cornerback spot. Are you going to rely on a true freshman like Kenton Dobson to come in there and take that spot? Can a guy like Jalen Thompson prove himself enough where you're willing to roll with him? And that's the thing. Maybe Jalen Thompson does become that guy, but I would like to have a little bit of a security blanket there. So maybe that's an area that Carolina is still looking at. Maybe that's something that they're still discussing amongst themselves. But it certainly is not the approach that I thought they should have taken at that spot. I think they should have been a little bit more aggressive in that area. We'll let them off the hook when it comes to the defensive line and the interior of the defensive line, because I do think that that is an area where, they kind of got caught off guard. They knew that there was a chance they lost one of the guys there. That was something that Inside Carolina reported a couple of weeks ago, that they kind of knew there was a chance that they would lose someone, but they were completely caught off guard after the transfer of CJ Mims, that they then lost DeAndre Robinson, who, of course, lands at Oregon. And so it looks like a big bag just dropped in for him. Carolina wasn't able to match it, and now they have to figure out how they're going to use the rotation there. I mean, Carolina did get one guy at the defensive line, at the defensive tackle position here so far in this transfer portal class, in Tarvorius Brown, but that's a guy that really didn't play much at Florida. So certainly an area that hopefully Carolina is considering adding somebody else before it's all said and done. And so that's the thing. It's not done yet, but it seems like most of the buzz has died down. So there might be a late ad for Carolina, but there's also a good chance that they're going to just roll with what they've got with this 19-man transfer portal class. Still, as I mentioned, we do have one comment on Facebook. Lenny Ryan says, are there any positives? As I said, I think the positive areas that you can really feel good about for Carolina, they went out, did the job that they needed to, edge rusher, linebacker, and I do think that, wide receiver is an area where they also did some pretty decent work along with tight end. I didn't mention wide receiver, but Trek Kekauna coming over from Wisconsin, definitely, a guy that didn't produce at the highest level at times at Wisconsin. They were wanting a little bit more from him, but 55 catches for 614 yards in his career, not the worst thing to be bringing in. Same thing with a guy out of Lehigh and Mason Humphrey, who has over 1,000 career receiving yards, career average of around 16 yards per catch. That's certainly going to be something that I think Carolina is going to welcome in. And so those are the areas that I would look at as the positives. The negatives, I still think, as I mentioned, the offensive line, quarterback, and the defensive back position, I think they could have, Carolina could have done a much better job going after someone for that corner spot opposite of Jaden Patterson. All right, one area that Carolina did take care of, and for a second it looked like Carolina wasn't going to take care of, was the hybrid linebacker safety position that they have on third downs. And so the guy that played there this past year, that would be Greg Smith. He was a guy that transferred in from Florida last offseason, and he officially signed last Thursday with Carolina after entering the portal the previous day. He's a guy that is coming off a redshirt freshman season where he played in all 12 games for Carolina. And in 273 snaps, he collected 25 total tackles, 1 total quarterback pressure, and 1 interception. More importantly, he had an outstanding season in coverage, allowing just 8 of his 14 targets to be caught for 50 yards and posting just a 34.8 quarterback rating allowed when targeted. So that shows you just how good he was for most of the year for Carolina. Definitely a guy that was able to lock down some tight ends, able to create some advantages against some of these slot receivers that he was matched up on. He really had a good year. One of the games that I really go back and watch him in and thought he played really well was the Cal game. That was really where his impact started to be felt. And from there, that impact really extended throughout the rest of the season. Now, what Carolina is going to do with him, I think, is going to be interesting, because what he, with the way that he played, he deserves more snaps, but you're probably not going to see more snaps in that hybrid linebacker safety role. I think Carolina really liked the role that they found for him last year, but they need help at the safety position. So I'll be interested to see what Greg Smith ends up doing this year. Again, if you remember from last year when we broke him down, really tall safety, 6'4". He's got some length on him. So definitely a guy that I could see factoring in at that safety position with that type of height. If he has the coverage ability that he showed out of that hybrid linebacker spot, then he certainly is going to be able to succeed for Carolina as a safety. I'd like to see him get at least a shot there, and would like to see him play a little bit more for Carolina this upcoming season, because I think he has shown that he is worth putting out there on the field. So not a re-signing that I think a lot of people thought going into the offseason we would have to be worried about. We're worried about it there for a second, but a good job by Carolina to make sure that they got him locked down. All right, guys, now let's move on. Let's talk a little bit of Drake Maye here on this edition of the podcast before we get out of here. That's right, Drake with a chance to play in the AFC Championship game. That's going to be on Sunday. It'll be the early game of the two. It'll be a 3:00 kickoff over there on CBS, I believe, for the Broncos and Patriots. Yes, CBS and Paramount Plus. We will be huddled in the WFNZ producer's house watching the game. It'll be all four of the board ops. A couple of guys from WBT will be there with us as well. So that's going to be a heck of a lot of fun, a little bit of a different setup. If you guys don't know, we work for WFNZ in Charlotte. This podcast also is part of their podcasting network. And so they have put us up in an Airbnb. It's going to be a lot of fun. So there'll be plenty of content that'll be coming out of that. But as I mentioned, we'll be back and ready to go for you guys on Monday here, at least on the football side of things, to break down Carolina's schedule. So that'll be a lot of fun. Probably Monday or Tuesday, one of the two. And either way, we could be coming to you from an Airbnb. So that'll be really cool. But yeah, Drake Maye, as you can see, wearing the shirt here tonight, supporting him. This is a great game that's going to be on tap, I think, for this weekend. The one thing that I will say is that Drake's had a fantastic year. I mean, the regular season was absolutely outstanding for him, from him, 4,394 yards, 31 touchdowns, 8 interceptions in the regular season. There's a reason why he's one of those guys that many people consider as a legitimate candidate to win the MVP for this season. It's either him or Matthew Stafford, and there's a chance that both of those guys could make it to the Super Bowl and we get a matchup between those two. But standing in the way of him and a Super Bowl appearance is going to be the shorthanded Denver Broncos, coached by Sean Payton. That is a group that is as well coached as just about any in all of football. And that's going to be the challenge that they have to navigate in this one. Mike Vrabel's done a tremendous job with the Patriots so far this year, getting them to this point, having them as one of the best teams in the NFL in the regular season as well. But this is a big game for Drake. Let's just lay it out there. Coming off of the performances that he had in the game against the Chargers in the wild card round, which was, not bad, but not great. And then the performance that he had in the game against the Texans, where he fumbled the ball multiple times, only luckily ends up losing a couple. But, Drake, 16 of 27, 179 yards, 3 touchdowns and an interception in that game, 4 carries for 10 yards. That was the thing in the first game against the Chargers. Much more efficient with his legs, 10 carries, 66 yards in that game. But, the thing that I've said about Drake, and I think this is ultimately what gives him a really good chance to win this game and get to the Super Bowl, I think that when he is needed to make plays, he has been able to make plays. Yes, I mean, he does, he does have the fumbles that he has to get cleaned up. I mean, 3 turnovers in that last game, certainly not great. 4 fumbles in that game overall. I think part of it is that, the offensive line hasn't necessarily been great. You got Will Campbell, Jared Wilson on the left side of his offensive line. That is certainly something that, is eventually in the future is really going to pay dividends for this group because they are so young and these guys will be able to grow. I think Will Campbell's a tremendous prospect at that left tackle spot. Same thing with Jared Wilson at that left guard spot. But they are being tested by some of the best edge rushers in the sport. For the Chargers, you had a couple of guys, and Khalil Mack, who of course has been going at it for a while. Ofe Owe, who's been very successful for them since coming over. And then, in the last game, you went against maybe the best duo in the NFL right now, edge rusher wise, in Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson. Both of those guys are outstanding. I believe both of those guys are on track to be AP first team honors for this year. First team all pro honors could also be, even if they're not first team all pro, both guys will be honored as all pro members for this season for how spectacular they have been. And now you've got, a challenge coming up. Nick Benito is certainly a guy that I think is worth noting. If you haven't been watching the NFL much this year, he's one of the more underrated edge rushers, I think, in the league. So, over the last couple of years, but especially this season, he's had a really spectacular performance. Certainly a guy that I think most people look at and believe is going to be very successful. Zach Allen, their other edge rusher, also another guy that I think a lot of people are watching coming into this game. But, this is a very talented defense, one of the better defenses in the entire league. And so I think this is going to be another challenge for Drake. That's one of the things. If he's able to get through this gauntlet, and it might not look pretty, that's the one thing that you have to know going into this game on Sunday, is that things might not always look perfect. But if he can navigate this, he's gone through three of the best defenses in the entire NFL. And there's a possibility that if the Seattle Seahawks advance, he could have to face another one if he wants to find a way to win a Super Bowl. But in terms of this matchup, the big thing that everybody's going to be talking about is that Jarrett Stidham is the starting quarterback for the Denver Broncos. Not a guy that inspires a lot of confidence, but certainly someone that I think is formidable, has been around the NFL for a long time, also a former Patriot. So there's going to be a little bit of motivation there for him against his former team. I think as long as Drake plays within himself, I think he's got a really good chance to be going to Super Bowl 60. I think that is, a goal that coming into the season probably seemed a little bit lofty. They're getting to Santa Clara, playing in a Super Bowl was probably something that a lot of people thought, hey, that's way too much to ask of a guy that is as young as he is. But I think he's kind of, he's shown you throughout the entire season that expectations are not something that he lets stand in the way. He's a guy that's going to shatter those expectations if he gets the chance to. So I expect him to come out, perform pretty well in this game on Sunday. I'm going to be locked in, ready to go with my Drake Maye jersey and everything like that, cheering him on, just like I know a lot of you Tar Heel fans are. And we'll have you covered when we do the podcast, whether it's on Monday or Tuesday. We'll break down what happened in the game. We'll tell you whether or not he's going to the Super Bowl. So make sure you are keeping up with us. And of course, if he does make it to the Super Bowl, we'll have some specials on him that we'll write on the blog side of things. Hoping that, sometime this offseason, maybe I can, somehow get a contact for him and maybe get him here on the podcast. But what a year it's been for him. It's special to see him succeeding. I know a lot of Tar Heel fans look at it and say, well, this just shows the failure that Mac Brown and his staff really, executed during their time with him, that they weren't able to necessarily win anything while he was here. But I encourage you, if you guys are, diehard Tar Heel fans, like, we are here on this podcast, and I know a lot of you are, lock in, watch this kid, continue what's been a special season and cheer him on. I know for some of you Panther fans, it might be a little bit difficult, because that's the team, the Patriots, that beat you in the first Super Bowl that the Panthers played in. But I will say, at least they don't have Sean Payton, right? That makes things a little bit more stomachable from a Panthers side of things. But it's going to be a really cool experience. I know his family's got to be extremely psyched for the opportunity to watch him play there. And he is right on the doorstep, guys, of making it to a Super Bowl in his second year. I think that would be amazing. So we'll have you covered with all that on the website. Same thing with the transfer portal, any other news that comes out, even over this icy weekend that's ahead of us. We'll have you covered on HeelToughBlog.com. We're going to be locked in on that game against Virginia on Saturday on the basketball side of things. We're going to watch the game here at my place. Then we're going to head up to the Airbnb. So we'll be locked in later on in the evening, hopefully be able to do a podcast for you guys. Hopefully the storm isn't that bad early on in the night to where we can do it from the Airbnb. If we can't, we're going to try to make the trek even through the icy conditions. We'll try to make the trek over to the station, which we should be able to walk to. So hopefully we'll be able to get some sort of edition of the Four Corners podcast out to you guys that night in order, to get prepared for that. Make sure you go and watch or listen to the last edition of the Four Corners podcast to get you prepared for that game against Virginia if you are making the trek up there, or if you want something to listen to here late tonight, make sure you guys go back and check that out for us. We would greatly appreciate it. Coverage of the rest of the basketball season will be coming your way, and some special guests potentially on the way this coming week on the Four Corners side of things. So make sure that you guys are keeping an eye out for that. But that's going to wrap it up for tonight's edition of the podcast. Want to thank all of you guys for watching and listening. Be safe out there. And as always, go Tar Heels.